It is a pleasure to be with everyone this afternoon from the comfort of my kitchen table, but I'm very excited to share with you a few of our most unwanted invasives that are a threat here in Illinois. And for those of you that may not know me, I coordinate invasive species surveys here at the University of Illinois. I'm based at the Illinois Natural History Survey, and I work with our Illinois Department of Ag and USDA APHIS PPQ to target and evaluate what potential invasive threats we feel are the biggest here in Illinois, and then coordinate and plan surveys around the state to look for them. Now, you might ask, how do invasive species get to Illinois, particularly insects? You know, we're in the middle of the country, we're surrounded by corn and soybean fields, but our state is actually full of potential introduction sites. We actually rank 5th in the US for risk of invasive species introductions. And that central geographic location actually means there's so many different ways for organisms to get here. We have a superior transportation system with the largest rail gateway in the nation. A lot of rail that is coming into Illinois is coming straight from Long Beach to Chicago through shipping containers, and then they're moved onto other rail systems and other trains, or even semi-trucks, and then distributed out from our Midwestern location. Our interstate highway system has more than 2,000 miles, and we have over 34,000 miles of highway. We also are home to O'Hare International Airport. It's the 3rd busiest airport in the world, 4th busiest international airport in the US, right behind JFK, Los Angeles, and Miami. We also have more than 100 sawmills and an unknown number of firewood dealers, and all these play a part in the movement of invasives into and around the state. Some of these items that are moving in the high-risk pathways are nursery stock and commodities. We often see nursery plants and products being shipped around the US. For example, flower bulbs imported from Denmark. We see citrus being imported from several different continents around the world. And while all of these commodities are routinely inspected, sometimes invasive species do manage to slip through our early detection efforts. The good news is we do have plans and programs in place that minimize this occurring in those pathways, and follow-up regulations on how we can potentially eradicate them should they come through. Something that's a little bit harder to regulate is containerized shipping. The number of shipping containers that enters the US each year continues to grow. We receive more than 11 million shipping containers by sea, 11 million enter the US by truck, and just over 2.5 million enter the US by rail. Within those shipping containers, we see a lot of solid wood packing material. And solid wood packing material, things like pallets and crates, different ways to contain cargo, they're associated with 97% of our quarantine significant invasive pests that are detected at ports of entry. And we know that solid wood packing material is present in more than 50% of those containers. Along with that solid wood packing material is another unregulated pathway, and that's raw wood. And so anything with bark still intact, and that includes raw timber, veneer quality logs, saw logs, burls, even stumps. And of course, firewood are ways that invasive species move. So you think of different tree killing insects or even pathogens that can be found in firewood. They can't move far on their own, but with our help, these different invasives can literally jump hundreds of miles very, very easily. So you start to see a pattern here. People are often our biggest mover of invasives. Now with the CAPS program, which is my program that we utilize for surveying for invasives, we come up with a list of our most unwanted pests in the state of Illinois each year. Luckily, in addition to our survey efforts, we get a lot of help from the general public looking for invasive species when they're out gardening, when they're out hiking. There's a lot more eyes and ears out in the state of Illinois than just those of us that are specifically working on invasive species surveys. So when we publish our unwanted pests each year, these are pests that are not known to occur here in Illinois or have a very limited distribution, but ones that we feel also involve the greatest risk to Illinois should they be introduced. So today what I want to do is touch briefly on a few of these and spend quite a bit of time actually on spotted lanternfly, which was what we consider one of our top invasive threats to the state here in the coming years. We're going to start first with gold-spotted oak borer. Now, gold-spotted oak borer is not known to occur in Illinois, and it's a buprested beetle. So a buprested that we are familiar with here is emerald ash borer, and you saw on the screen while you're waiting for things to get started those emerald ash borer larvae. This is a wood-boring insect. Currently, it's only known to occur here in the US in California. The first outbreaks were observed back in 2004, though they think now, after tracing some things back, looking at its symptoms and the patterns of trees dying, that it may have been present as early as the 1990s and early 2000s. It has caused extensive mortality to the California black oak, which is in the red oak family. And we know that buprested beetles, like emerald ash borer, what kind of impact they have on those trees. And so when we look at gold-spotted oak borer, the potential mortality it could cause to other oaks in that red oak family could be a serious threat to our native oaks here in Illinois. So if we look at some of the symptoms, or what would an infestation of gold-spotted oak borer look like? A buprested beetle, when they emerge from trees, all have the very distinct D-shaped exit hole. So you'd be looking at D-shaped exit holes in oak trees. They also bore directly underneath the bark, much like emerald ash borer, though we don't have that distinct S-shaped galleries like we see with EAB. When we have extensive boring, they're interrupting the flow of water and nutrients to the tree, so you get the very symptomatic wilting, yellowing of leaves, dieback, and ultimate death of those trees. And here at the bottom of the screen, you see some examples of those California black oaks in different stages of infestation, and then also ones that have died after several years of dealing with this pest. The second pest that we're looking at today is the Asian gypsy moth. Also, we have no known populations in Illinois. There are also no known infestations to occur in the US, though we have had several interceptions over the past few years. So this particular moth is closely related to the European gypsy moth, which we do have here in Illinois. They're similar in appearance, and our main difference is size. Asian gypsy moth is slightly larger, similar patterns on their wings. Two of the biggest differences, though, is that the Asian gypsy moth has a wider host range than our current gypsy moth that we deal with. The Asian gypsy moth females also fly. Now, for those of you that may deal with European gypsy moth or know about that, European gypsy moth females do not fly. So their distribution relies solely on the movement, artificial movement, primarily through that of their eggs, where they lay their eggs. And then they have a very slow natural movement. The fact that Asian gypsy moth females can fly poses one of our biggest threats, as they could spread rapidly through the US should they become established. Asian gypsy moth larvae are voracious feeders, so much like European gypsy moth, they're defoliators. They can defoliate trees very rapidly. And when you have several years of infestation, you weaken the trees and you get ultimately tree death. The fact that it does have a bigger host range is also a concern, as there will be a lot more potential for it to become established and then also spread. We also have Asian longhorn beetle. This is one that is not really a stranger to Illinois. We've dealt with Asian longhorn beetle before. When we look, well, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. If we look at the characteristics of Asian longhorn beetles, the larvae are cylindrical, they have no legs, and so they're very cream, light yellow in color, and they can be up to 2 inches in length, which is pretty robust for a larva. The adults are very easy to distinguish. They're large longhorn beetles, which indicates that their antennae are longer than the body itself, and they're black with white spots. Their antennae are also striped. So you see a lot of that black and white stripe pattern on their antennae, black bodies with white stripes. While we don't have an active infestation in Illinois, the fact that there are active populations in both New York and Ohio, it is a concern of ours of a reintroduction. And so it remains on our watch list based on the fact of how much of an impact it had when we had it back in Illinois in the late 1990s. We first discovered it in Illinois in 1998 in Ravenswood up in the Chicago area. And through a combination of tree removal, chemical treatments, survey, a lot of money and a lot of effort, we were able to eradicate it in Illinois, and we officially declared it eradicated in 2008. And so you can see the photo of that Ravenswood neighborhood where they're literally taking down every tree in that area. And so the potential impact Asian longhorn beetle could have given its reintroduction is significant. Now, if we look at the life cycle of Asian longhorn beetle, the adult females will chew depressions into the bark of different hardwood species. And then they lay an egg about the size of a rice grain right underneath the bark at each site. Females can lay up to about 90 eggs in their lifetime. And so once eggs are laid, within about 2 weeks, that egg hatches and the white larva bores into the tree. Now it will feed on the living tissue and bore into the tree itself. After several weeks, it tunnels into the woody tree tissue, continues to feed, and then it continues to develop over the winter. As it feeds, they form tunnels or galleries into the tree trunks and the branches. And if you remember, as that larvae grows, it can be up to 2 inches in length, and it's a pretty, leaving a pretty big tunnel within that tree trunk or the branch. And over the course of that year, we complete development from pupa to adult, and the adults emerge. They chew their way out of the tree, and they leave exit holes. And you'll notice an exit hole in a branch or in the trunk is about the size of a dime. Pretty large. You can see how quickly they can impact a tree. And if we look at different cross sections, it's not just one tunnel, they tunnel all the way through the tree itself. Now, Asian longhorn beetle feeds on dozens of different species from different plant families, though it generally prefers maples, elms, as well as willows. Here in Illinois, we have several beetle species that are lookalikes to Asian longhorn beetle. And these are the ones we get the most calls about. Cottonwood borer being the number one. It is a white colored beetle with black spots. So its colors are an inverse of the Asian longhorn beetle. So we tend to get a lot of calls with that. The other ones are the Sawyer beetles, both the white spotted Sawyer, darker colored, very small white specks or spots on its elytra. Then we also have a lighter colored northeastern Sawyer that's more tannish brown in color with white markings. And then of course, one of my personal favorite insects in general is the eyed click beetle, just because it's cool looking. But we see some similarities with that black body, white spots, but the most significant difference between that and Asian longhorn beetle is the actual antennae. It doesn't have the long antennae of a longhorn beetle. So just a few of the insects that we see regularly in Illinois that often get confused with Asian longhorn beetle. Now, back to spotted lanternfly, which is what I'm going to spend most of my time here on today. This is probably our latest and greatest threat, if you want to title it that. The spotted lanternfly, excuse me, is a sap-feeding plant hopper. Now, you'll see, given the measurements along the side of the screen, it's the nymph stages are pretty small, but as we get into the adult stage, it is a fairly sizable plant hopper that is readily noticeable. The nymphs develop through 4 different stages, and they're all wingless. The first 3 are black with white spots, and they almost appear tick-like. They're very small, and I could see how they could easily get confused, particularly the first 2 instars. Now, as they approach the 4th instar, they start to gain a more reddish color, and they develop red patches on their body, and they're just over a ½ inch long. The adults are 1½ inches long. One of the most vibrantly colored insects that we're dealing with. While the forewing is gray and has black spots, the hind wings are bright red right at the base. And as we go through a couple more slides, we'll go into more detail about how to identify it and the different things to look for. The spotted lanternfly is native to China, India, and Vietnam. It was also introduced to South Korea and Japan. It's been present in the US as early as 2014, where it was first found in Pennsylvania. It has a very wide host range of both agricultural and urban plants and trees. It utilizes 70 different plant species in the US, and that number is actually probably higher. It continues to grow the more we learn about it, but some of the biggest hosts that we are concerned about are things such as grapes, plums, cherries, nectarines, and apricots, also apples, various hardwoods, and pines. So you could see how this could be a huge threat to Illinois' grape, tree fruit industries, as well as our plant nurseries and our timber industry as well. This is the most recent distribution map from spotted lanternfly. Now, I'm sorry, I wanted to get the whole map in here, but it may be a little hard to see. Areas of blue are where a spotted lantern infestation is present. So you see Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, even a few counties in Virginia. Those blue areas that are outlined in red are areas where there are internal state quarantines, where they're monitoring the movement of different products as well. We also have on this map small purple dots, which may be what is hardest to see. And those cover a lot more states. There's one single dot all the way down in North Carolina. You look at West Virginia, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York. These are all locations where a single spotted lanternfly has been found. But upon further survey or looking, they can't find any other indication of a spotted lanternfly population or anything being established there. So these are probably cases where spotted lanternfly has been artificially moved to that location. And those numbers continue to grow every time I see a map like this. Survey is being done extensively throughout these states, looking at surrounding counties. This is a hotbed for spotted lanternfly research, and we're getting a lot of great information out of these areas. This area is also an area that's been heavily impacted agriculturally in their natural areas, as well as in their home life, and we'll discuss that more as well. When we look at this threat of spotted lanternfly to Illinois, we've had a couple different resources that have been shared with us. This is a map that looks at the likelihood of a spotted lanternfly introduction. And this model is based on the likelihood of it to be introduced. And it's looking at vehicle traffic volume, population densities, railway density, and also takes in some different industry pathways. And the darker red indicates a higher likelihood of a potential area of introduction. And so if you look at this state, the map with the state of Illinois, a lot of the dark red areas are urban areas. You can also visibly see interstates, how they play a part in this. And highways, potential rail as well. Another interesting map that we take into account is a potential distribution of spotted lanternfly. This particular map looks at host ranges of spotted lanternfly. So should it get introduced in this area or different area, is there a host range? What about the temperature and the climate? How suitable is it to survive and become established? And as you go from white, which is unsuitable, to green, yellow, and ultimately that reddish orange indicates a high probability of establishment. And you see how suitable Illinois is should it get introduced here. And this kind of just helps frame for us the importance of keeping this insect in our surveys in the forefront of our community outreach because of its potential impact should it become established here. We have been actively surveying for spotted lanternfly for a couple years. We have done surveys through my program in both orchards and vineyards. We also did a survey up in the northeastern part of the state last year, looking at high-risk pathways for both Asian gypsy moth and some other Asian defoliators, and included in that was also spotted lanternfly. So industrial sites, intermodal areas, Amazon distribution warehouses, things like that where you see a lot of different commodities moving in and out of an area. We also look at Tree of Heaven distribution. Tree of Heaven is one of the primary hosts of spotted lanternfly. We also know that the adults spend a significant part of their life cycle on Tree of Heaven. So when we know where Tree of Heaven is, we could, also use that as a base for surveys as well. If we start breaking down what we know about spotted lanternfly, we're going to start with its life cycle. To detect an infestation, we want to be able to accurately identify a pest, and that means we need to know what it looks like in different stages. And this is an invasive pest that looks very different in every stage of its development. Now, females will lay eggs from late September through October. They lay them just on anything really. Tree trunks, limbs, anything with a smooth surface. They find them out in Pennsylvania on stone, outdoor furniture. They're also finding through different research that they really like rusty surfaces. So think about how rusty some of our rail cars are that move through the US. That would be a prime location for them to leave some eggs. Newly laid egg masses kind of look almost like a patch of mud. They're gray, mud-like, and that's the covering over top of the eggs, I should clarify. And as they dry and over time, they have more of a cracked appearance. Old egg masses kind of look like columns of seeds, and underneath that mud-like covering, they can lay 30 to 50 eggs at a time. That egg mass can be about 1 inch or more long. And we start to see nymphs hatching in late spring, late April, early May, and they start this development through those 4 instars that we talked about earlier. And as a reminder, they're all wingless and they are all incapable of flight. So you have nymphs that will basically walk up a host plant, feed, and then it drops to the ground. It walks up a host plant, feeds, drops to the ground. And they do that day after day after day. The first 3 nymphal stages are black and white. And as it approaches that 4th instar, if you remember, it starts to turn more of a vibrant red. Those 4th instars are generally around in July. And as we move from late summer into early fall, that's when we start that transition from 4th instar to those adult stages. Lanternfly adults can appear as early as late July. They're about 1.5 inches long when their wings are folded. And in that late summer, early fall timeframe, that's when they begin mating, and they'll really start gathering in large congregations, and you'll start seeing egg laying. And while we see them gathering during this time frame on willow, on grapevines, on maples, this is that time frame where they seem to actively search out tree of heaven. So a great survey time for spotted lanternfly is late summer, early fall, looking at tree of heaven to see if we see any of those adults present. I mentioned that they're plant hoppers. So that means they are sap suckers. They have a very long needle-like mouth part. Ironically, they do not feed on the fruits. They suck the sap from the plants, the stems, the petioles, and as they, as adults, their mouth parts are a little more indestructible. Yeah, that's when you'll see them feeding on trees. As nymphs, those mouth parts are nearly as hard or durable, and you'll see them more on soft host plants, I guess, is the best description I can give you. So ultimately, we see the loss of sap from stems and leaves, reducing photosynthesis in that plant, and then ultimately you'll start to see wilting, leaf curling, and dieback. And when we look at it on host plants such as apples or grapes, and these are some photos from out in Pennsylvania, those vines and that apple tree are covered. What's not covered is the actual fruit itself. So they're feeding on the branches and the trunks of the tree, on the vines of the grapes, on the petioles of those leaves. So they're bringing in a lot of liquid, and that liquid comes out, and it comes out as honeydew. And honeydew is something we talk a lot about with aphids. Aphids excrete tons and tons of honeydew. Well, so does spotted lanternfly. When it excretes all that honeydew, it drops at the base of the plant, on the understory, in the forest. You get a lot of sooty mold growth, and it starts inhibiting the photosynthesis of other plants. And so it's not only affecting its host plant, but the plants around it. That honeydew is also a problem as it starts to affect quality of life. Not only the honeydew, but when we are talking about hundreds of thousands of spotted lanternfly in certain areas of Pennsylvania, it's starting to affect the quality of life of those residents. The populations are so high, they're covering trees, they're swarming in the air, they're covering swing sets, and those swing sets are covered in sticky honeydew, or honeydew is covering sidewalks or back steps of homes. So it also has a quality effect as well. If we look a little bit closely at spotted lanternfly egg masses, we talked about having a mud-like covering and the fact that they lay them anywhere. We see telephone poles, logs. Here we, on the bottom left, we have them on grapevines and on rusty old metal. As it gets a little bit older, a little bit drier, you can see how they start to crack. I don't know if you can see that. Some where they've emerged, it leaves them looking like columns. And so we have lots of other things that kind of resemble spotted lanternfly egg masses. The gypsy moth egg masses are very similar in color, a little bit in appearance, but whereas spotted lanternfly egg masses are more mud-like, gypsy moth egg masses a little more fuzzy, a little more furry, if you will. We get a little bit of confusion when we look at different mosses or lichen, also mantis egg cases, also some old egg masses where different insects have emerged, have started to pop up as people thinking those might be spotted lanternfly egg masses as well. So lots of different things we could confuse them with. When we start looking at the nymphs, they're very distinct in their color. But I think we have a couple possibilities here in Illinois that could be easily confused. One of those being a wheelbug nymph. It has a more orangey appearance. What it's missing is definite white spots. We'll see white spots in that vibrant red on those later instar lanternfly nymphs. And then assassin bug nymphs kind of have that black, white, orangish coloration that upon closer inspection, once again, we can probably rule it out pretty easy, but at first glance may be confusing to people. Then of course, while this is a reference from Virginia, we have several of these species present in Illinois too. And when I think of spotted lanternfly adults, what we may get most of our calls about will be a tiger moth. Has the same coloration with those orangish underwings, brown and black on the forewings, but whereas spotted lanternfly has spots, the tiger wing has more stripes. Also, we start looking at things like Ailanthus webworm, which is very common here in Illinois, also a potential to be easily confused, but it is much, much smaller than a spotted lanternfly. So what can you do when we start talking about all of these invasives? And that's a lot of information to take in. And so some of my advice I give to people is really be familiar with your regional and local pests. And if you know what are your typical pests that are of economic importance, you are more likely to know when something just doesn't seem right or there's something new in the mix. Know your seasonal pest patterns. So if you know something is here when it shouldn't be, and then weather patterns also can play a part as well. And we ask you to report. If you ever are in doubt, report it, because we don't know unless you tell us. And speaking of reports, what I'm getting a lot of reports on the past couple of weeks are concerns of Asian giant hornets. Now, this is an invasive that's on our radar here in Illinois. We get a couple calls every year about it. We keep up to date on what's going on around the world, where it's being found. The Asian giant hornet is making news lately, and we're going to once again say, you know, this is not known to occur in Illinois. And we do, we have Illinois Department of Ag has apiary surveys, inspectors that keep an eye on the different beekeeping hives and that around the state. While it's not known to occur in Illinois, we do know it's gaining some momentum because they did have those isolated finds in Washington last year. And they're still investigating what's going on. Those do appear to be isolated, and they are continuing to survey for that. We don't feel that there are any here. We do encourage reports if you feel like you have it. Overall, these are predaceous hornets. They sting, but they do not target humans. So while it is getting called a murder hornet, it is not because of its threat to humans. It's because of its voracious feeding and attacking of honeybees. Now, here, and unlike other hornets, they do feed on our honeybee colonies. And that is one of the biggest concerns. What we do think is we have a lot of lookalikes here in Illinois. We get the most calls in recent years when we have confusion with cicada killers when they're present in the summer. Where most of the submissions I'm getting this past week are European hornets, which are present in Illinois. We also are here in Illinois have bald-faced hornets, paper wasps, yellow jackets, and cicada killers that could potentially be confused with the Asian giant hornet. But they're very different in color. So I did include this reference out of Georgia, which is great with not only pictures, but you'll notice the red boxes underneath. For instance, a lot of the calls I'm getting are European hornet. They're at the bottom. Its thorax is not fully brown. You can see some breaking of that pattern and some yellow. Whereas when you look at the Asian giant hornet, they have a very brown thorax. The abdomen has banding, complete banding all the way across. So I find this a very good reference at some of our other insects that are easily confused here. And I apologize for kind of fumbling through that. I've not had to give a talk on Asian giant hornets ever, but we did want to include just a little bit about them because there are so many questions coming our way in the last week and a half. So anytime you have a potential invasive to report or have a question, we always recommend contacting your local extension office. You can get a hold of me. There's my email. Invasives@illinois.edu also comes straight to my inbox. And as we gear up spotted lanternfly outreach and education, we have a separate account for all lanternfly questions and submissions to go to lanternfly@illinois.edu. Always send your insects in a crush-proof container. It's very easy to take a photo. We work with them too, but most importantly, it's all in the details. The more details you can give us, the better. And I appreciate your time. You can always find information through extension resources, as well as some information with the Illinois Pest Survey. And with that, I'll leave my contact information up for you, and I think turn it back over to Chris.
Thank you, Kelly, very much. We do already have quite a few questions. Anybody that has additional questions, please type them into the chat box, and we're going to go ahead and start with what we have here. So I'm just going to kind of go down the line here. Somebody asked about there being worldwide concern about declining insect populations and wanted to know any feedback on that in Illinois, anybody tracking anything, or kind of what's going on with Illinois in relation to that?
You know, my focus primarily is on invasive, so I do tend to not have blinders on, but I do tend to focus on that a lot. I do know, even through the Illinois Natural History Survey, we have lots of different surveys going on. And they do look at insects in natural areas, in lots of different areas. And I know they have a long-term database so that we are monitoring it, but I don't have a good handle on telling you, yes, it's declining, or yes, it's stable, or even on the diversity, because that's not necessarily my specialty. So I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay, no worries. Somebody wrote about the tachnid flies that are parasitizing larvae, caterpillar larvae, and they said they're having an issue with them when they're trying to raise monarchs. And any suggestions on coping with parasitic flies?
And it's in monarchs. I have not ever had that. I always have a more of an issue with monarchs and just climate in general where I'm trying to raise them. And it could be not knowing their situation on where they're raising them or how they're raising them. I don't know if the tachynids are coming in from where they're at, or if it's coming with the monarchs, if they're getting caterpillars. So I don't have a good answer for that, not knowing more details on that. I guess shoot me an email.
Alrighty. Is spotted lanternfly considered an invasive or a destructive pest in its native countries? And they made note here that those countries have some of the same fruit trees.
They do, and it's not as destructive in those countries. And we see that a lot with invasives in general. For instance, you know, they don't necessarily see that with spotted lanternfly in their native countries. They don't see that with emerald ash borer in Asia. They also don't see that with Asian giant hornet, because the honeybees there have it's like scouts out, and they can deal with the Asian giant hornet before it ever gets to the hive. So whenever you take something out of its natural area, everything changes. And so we lose a lot of our natural enemies that keep things in check, and you have different environments that also play a part.
All righty. We had several questions that related to tree of heaven and spotted lanternfly. Somebody just made a comment about tree of heaven is also an invasive species. They were asking about that.
Tree of heaven is an invasive species, and this might be the one good thing that comes of this, is that we can use it as a potential indicator plant to determine, you know, it could be an early detector for spotted lanternfly in Illinois. If we can keep an eye on those tree of heaven locations, particularly near higher risk pathways like rail, interstate, places like that, it could be where we see spotted lanternfly first show up.
Okay. Somebody made a comment that their neighbor has a tree of heaven and this year it's not budding or not doing very well. In those cases, should they be looking out for spotted lanternfly?
I would say always look out for invasive species, but the likelihood of it being just in a neighbor's yard is pretty small. There would need to be some way for it to be introduced. But, you know, declining trees for spotted lanternfly doesn't necessarily mean that it's more attractive either. So still a potential host. Likelihood of introductions at that neighbor's tree is probably pretty slim.
There was a request to put up your contact information again, Kelly. If you can put that slide up, some people would appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened. I bumped something.
Oh, no problem. While you're scrolling through that, I'll just go ahead and ask the last of these tree heaven questions. Somebody noticed that the distribution map for Illinois that you put up for tree of heaven, they were asking about some of the negative, the data there. Are those gaps in the map due to lack of data? Because they certainly know of some tree of heaven in counties that were not marked on the map.
Well, those are probably counties that have not had an official record. And I got that handy dandy map from our very own Chris Evans through EdMaps. And so we encourage people to report the tree of heaven through EDS maps, and that will get it on that map so we know. And there's actually a long list of different plants and even insects that you can report through that.
Okay, great. Let me see here. There was a question about, the spotted lanternfly have any predators here in the U.S.? Do any birds eat them? Then there was another question that's related. Basically, what do you do? What's being done with spotted lanternfly once they occur?
Those are both really good questions. Given like the time frame of this talk, I could only hit a lot of highlights on more of this is what it looks like and the importance of this as an invasive. But there's a lot of different research right now that's coming out of those mid-Atlantic states, looking at potential natural enemies, looking at biological control options, also looking at different IPM strategies, things as simple as when I talked about the nymphs, they can't fly, so they have to climb up the trunk of a tree. So you wrap sticky banding around a tree. And so as they try to come up it, they get caught in the sticky bands. And of course, they're looking at different insecticides for some of the agricultural settings. Lots of good information coming out of there. I know there's been several spotted lanternfly updates coming out of Penn State. I think if you go to the Northeast IPM Center, there should be links to some of those research updates as well.
Okay, great. Somebody wanted to know, are there any insects native to the United States that are invasive in other countries?
Yes. So I've always been told that, you know, we deal a lot with insects, pathogens coming to the US. And we send just as many the other way. We're a very international economy. Things are shipped back and forth very readily. And so there are, with the movement of products going all the time, there are insects coming and going. And so there's always the potential of something that's native to the US being somewhere else.
Okay. Somebody wanted to know, how are most of these invasives transferred from their country of origin? They stated then they live in an area with many trucks and trains using intermodal facilities. Could they come in and maybe be transferred along these lines?
They are. That is one of our biggest potential pathways. A lot of wood-focused pests are coming in on that solid wood packing material or cargo, things like that. You know, we do have a lot of movement to those intermodals. Not all of those containers are opened. And so they may come to an intermodal, but then just get put on another train or on a truck and then dispersed. And so we continue to look at those locations, and not to target different things, but like manufacturers that are getting big shipments all the time. We try to keep surveys focused on those potential neighborhoods where you're getting that kind of stuff shipped in. You know, insects are so adaptable that they can pretty much come anyway. And you think, I think, or how can I word this? You think you have it all figured out, and then some new way of insects showing up to the US happens. So they really can move anyway, but yes, intermodals, rail, things like that are a definite pathway that is a possibility.
All righty, great. Somebody commented here that they have found dozens of worms in a mulch pile that they think are probably jumping worms, and wanted to know how damaging are jumping worms, or will they be in Illinois?
Jumping worms are in Illinois. Chris Evans is probably our head jumping worm expert. I generally refer most calls to Chris on that, just because he's been such a good wealth of knowledge, and you also keep track of all of our infestations for mapping purposes. So yes, it is a potential problem, and if they're unsure of if they are jumping worms or not, we'd be happy to take a look and help them out to figure out if it is.
Great. A couple more questions here coming in. One is, any good ways to combat spotted winged Drosophila? And then also, how pervasive is it in Illinois?
We consider spotted winged Drosophila to be present throughout the state of Illinois. Depending on what you're dealing with, not knowing, we survey for more in large orchards in our orchard surveys, but we do see it a lot in backyard gardens and things like that. One of our trapping methods is also a great way to figure out when it becomes present in your area, and that's just apple cider vinegar in a cup we hang them from our apple trees. Put a cover on it with a couple holes and you keep an eye out for it. Depending on if you're looking at peaches, berries, or whatnot, your management strategies are going to be different. Extension has a lot of good references in their Illinois fruit and vegetable news. If you're more in that, or their home yard and garden newsletter also has some articles that may, if you're more of a home owner.
Alrighty. And then the last one that came in is, somebody wants a link to those annual invasive fact sheets that you saw at the beginning, are most unwanted. If you send me the link to those, Kelly, what I can do is include that on our email. When I email everybody next week, I'm going to send them PDF slide handout of the handouts for the presentations, as well as links to the recordings to all these, and I can include that in there as well, if that works.
That would be perfect. I will do that.
Alrighty. I think that's the last of our questions. So I definitely want to thank you, Kelly, for a wonderful presentation, and I want to thank everybody for attending, and hope that everybody comes tomorrow and listens to our final presentation.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.